Today we'll be speaking with Dr. Amy Hasinoff. She's an expert on sexting and revenge porn and creator of Advent's newly released Juvenile Sexting course and the Adult Revenge Porn course. I'm Josh Hartledge, president of Adventfs.com, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm very excited to talk with Dr. Hasinoff about these fascinating subjects. As I travel around to prosecutors, judges, and probation offices around the country, sexting and revenge porn are two of the hottest issues and hardest issues for jurisdictions to deal with. So it's important for agencies to have an understanding of what they are and a strategy to address these very unique situations. Hopefully, with what Dr. Hasinoff has developed in our courses and our Q&A today, it'll help you get your arms around the issue. Okay, so now let me introduce you to our guest. Amy Adele Hasinoff is an associate professor of communications at the University of Denver. She has been researching and writing about sexting and revenge porn for more than 10 years. Her 2015 book, Sexting Panic, is about the well-intentioned but problematic responses to sexting in mass media, law, and education. Her book was the winner of the 2016 National Communication Association Diamond Anniversary Book Award. Dr. Hasinoff has been interviewed in over 100 media outlets, including CNN, CBS, and Forbes, and has given TED Talks in Denver and Vienna, Austria. I believe we provided you a link to an interview she did, so I encourage you to check that out and those TED Talks as well. Incidentally, Amy is joining us today from Germany today, so Guten Abend, Dr. Hasinoff, and thank you for your time today.
Guten Morgen. I'm still learning German, but thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Perfect. Well, let's get right into it. So how did you become one of the nation's experts on sexting and revenge porn?
Yeah, so I've been studying it for over 10 years now. It started when I was working my PhD around the mid-2000s. I was really interested in the ideas about online predators at the time, and sexting had just become a media buzzword in about 2008. And at that time, it was going to be like a chapter of my dissertation. It just sort of took over the entire project, and I've been sort of researching it in different ways, really ever since 2008.
Okay. So at the core, what is sexting and why do people do it?
Yeah, so I like to think about sexting as basically as any kind of other sex act. Obviously, it has a lot of different risks attached to it, but so much of it is the same. And I think that's a really helpful way for people to start by thinking about sexting, is thinking about it as you would any other sex act, maybe one that you personally do or don't do. That's not relevant. The point is thinking about why other people might do it, is just putting it in that context of what people are going to be doing with their romantic and their sexual partners, right? And so a lot of those risks are going to be the same as with in-person sex acts, but of course there's a whole bunch of other risks and things to think about that technology kind of add on to it. But I think that sort of basic question people ask me of like, why do people sext? I think the answer is actually really simple, and it's the same basic reason as why people would engage in like any other sex act, and that's because they find it pleasurable, they find it a way to connect with a partner, and we hear a lot about teen sexting, but in fact, young adults are some of the most frequent sexters, 18 to 24. Studies are showing like over 50% of young adults are sexting, and I've even seen studies of people over 65, and the rates there are like 5 to 10%. So as far as I can tell in the research, people of all ages are choosing to sext.
So, well, as I mentioned in my intro, these are hot topics, and it seems many states have created juvenile sexting laws and diversion programs. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so federally and then in pretty much every state, what we have is child pornography laws that are applying to teen sexting. And so those are felony laws, and they often come with sex offender registration. And so there was a lot of backlash in the last 10 years to people using felony convictions for teenagers that had been caught sexting. And so about half of states in the U.S. have passed new misdemeanor laws that basically cover a similar type of behavior, but actually a bit broader. So the child pornography laws, they have to depict a sex act occurring or a focus on genitals, but the sexting laws are broader, and then they really vary by state. but the penalties are much lighter because people felt like felonies were really too harsh to apply to any type of sexting. So there's sort of this intent to prevent sexting from happening with these laws and to address some of the problems. But I think a lot of it was sort of backlash against the felonies that some prosecutors were using in child pornography cases.
So getting specific to our customers' concerns, can you tell us about the sexting course that you developed for Advent and what the topics that are covered?
Yeah, so the course is intended to apply to anyone who has been involved in sexting. So that could be someone who created a photo of themselves. That could be someone who took a photo of another person and distributed it. And it's intended to sort of broadly apply to any teenager that might have been involved in any way. So it's not specific to something sort of non-consensual distribution. It could be someone who created a photo as well, and the content is fairly relevant for everyone. So it talks about sexting and what it is, why people do it, all of that information about how it works, and statistics and background information and so on. And then we also spend most of our time, we spend a lot of our time talking about consent, because usually this is something that if there has been a non-consensual distribution, then consent has been violated. And this is also just something that a lot of teenagers are not getting in their sort of normal sex education classes, if they even have those in high schools. Of course, not every school does. And so it sort of fills in that consent piece that they probably don't know enough about, even if they've learned a little bit. And so they talk about nonverbal and verbal consent. And we also talk a lot about rape myths, because that in the research is a pretty strong predictor of someone who's going to perpetrate sexual violence, is if they believe in some of the common myths about rape. We also talk about objectification, because of course when you have a sexual image that's potentially being distributed, then objectification is a big issue. And in the course we also tie in all of those issues to online abuse, thinking about the distribution of an image as a form of online abuse, thinking about the role of technology in cyberbullying, what bystanders can do in cyberbullying. So we're trying to think about how to use technology in a healthy way in our social lives and in our relationships. And then we end on the concept of revenge porn, which really ties together all of the different topics that the course has covered so far. We talk about what it is and why it happens. We talk about victim blaming, because that's a big part of the harm with revenge porn. And we also talk about what bystanders can do. So the course is broad enough that really anyone who has been involved in sexting, it could find something very relevant and potentially useful in that course.
So I know you also created a revenge porn course for us. I guess that course is just a deeper dive into what you touch on in the juvenile sexting?
Yeah, so that one, we spend more time on revenge porn. We cover some of that. We also talk a lot about consent in that course. The revenge porn course is pitched for adults, of course, so they will be addressed as, appropriately as adults, and the sexting course is addressed to teenagers, so that definitely changes the content. The consent part is the same, for sure. We also talk about sexting in revenge porn. The major difference with the revenge porn course is at the beginning we start with a section on masculinity, what it is basically, and how expectations about masculinity sort of create limits and constraints for men, which I think is a really important entry point into thinking about revenge porn, because what the research is telling us about revenge porn is that it's almost always a very gendered sexual violence type crime. So we can't really separate it out from these sort of ideas about gender that people have. And again, the reason that I'm starting with masculinity is what I mentioned before about rape myths. It's also the case that the research is very clear that people who believe in really extreme gender stereotypes, like men are this way, women are this way, that they're completely separate, men or women, regardless, if you believe in those stereotypes, you're actually more likely to perpetrate sexual violence, which is, sort of an interesting finding from the research. So the reason that it starts with that is to try to unpack some of those ideas, some of those stereotypes, some of those myths, and to try to understand, get a sort of different understanding of gender, which I think sets the groundwork for understanding if you feel this, if you feel this entitlement to share someone's photos, which is what we're talking about with revenge porn, there's usually something behind that about someone's idea about what they're entitled to that can be connected to gender and sort of ideas about sexuality. So we start with that to really sort of lay that sort of groundwork in terms of rethinking what are the assumptions that maybe led this person to do this act of harm that, I think to most people would be obviously really horrible thing to do, but then why did this person sort of think that would be okay? And actually the research on this is interesting because I think it was about 2/3 of people in one study said that they didn't realize that sending out a naked photo of basically their ex-girlfriend, which is usually what happens, they didn't realize that this would be harmful, and they regretted doing it. So clearly there's some education that's like missing there, where 2/3 of people are like, oh, I didn't know that would be harmful. And it's like, well, first of all, I don't know how you didn't know that, but they didn't, right? So there's something missing, and I'm trying to sort of fill in some of those gaps. And then just the end of the course is different as well, because I put in a section trying to help people think about accountability, how they might apologize to the person they harmed, how they might sort of unthink that victim blaming attitudes that a lot of people have, and then thinking about the specific effects on victims. So there's been some studies of revenge porn and how it's actually as harmful as rape or sexual assault to the victims. And so I think that's important for the perpetrators to understand, because clearly, a lot of them don't quite get that yet. So the course for revenge porn is definitely focused on someone who has committed a pretty serious act of harm, and the course is trying to walk them through that. That's a bit different than the sexting course, which is kind of more appropriate for a broader audience.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting that they don't see that as a problem, that some people don't see it as a problem.
It's amazing.
Jeez. Just like with juvenile sexting, it appears that a lot of states have started to put in revenge porn laws as well. Same kind of question as before. What do you think the legislatures are seeking to achieve with those laws?
Yeah, so a lot of states have revenge porn laws now. I think it was 40 to 45 last time I checked, so almost all states, and they keep adding them. And I think with revenge porn, it's, I think a lot of it was public outcry about the fact that until those laws existed, there wasn't really any other law that applied. And so people were struggling to figure out, well, what is this, a violation of privacy? Is this an infliction of emotional distress? Is this like stalking? Is this electronic harassment? And it didn't quite fit a lot of the laws that were existing. And there was sort of a sense that, because this is so harmful, so if, you distribute photos of your ex-girlfriend or your ex-wife and very sexual photos to her boss and her parents and her family and her coworkers, like, this is obviously a very serious and damaging and harmful behavior. And so, if we're going to have sexual violence be illegal, it would be consistent, right, to have revenge porn be illegal, because it is just as harmful and it's happening on the same sort of type of interpersonal dynamic where it's often like this intimate partner abuse situation. Sometimes it is strangers, but usually the victim and the perpetrator know each other. That's typical. So I think like when you sort of look at the facts of, okay, someone is putting a photo of their ex-wife on a website and then she's getting hundreds of calls a day from, these horrible strangers on the internet. It's like, how is that not illegal, right? It just kind of seems intuitive that it should be illegal. And so that has happened fairly quickly in the last about 5 years. I think all of those states have sort of added revenge porn laws. And I think like they get, the legislators who passed the laws, I think in both of these cases, obviously, to be cynical about it, they get to get a press release saying that they're, solving a problem, when in fact they're creating a tool, right, for prosecutors to address a problem, but, whether or not they're solving the problem is, further research needed on that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll kind of lump the two courses together, but, what do you hope that people that take the course get out of it, as well as, and maybe a second question would be, what do you hope that the folks that are giving the courses, the prosecutors, the probation officers, hope to get out of the programs?
Yeah, I think for the people giving the course, it gives you an option that has sort of a rehabilitation aim. It gives you a chance to provide people with like an educational intervention that's maybe gives them a second chance to sort of grow and learn and understand what they did. In the case of revenge porn. In the case of sexting, it's more about understanding the risks and the benefits. Of course, you can talk about risks to teenagers all day and they won't really listen to you because they know that there are benefits. So you have to talk about both. And I think that is what's, I think, particularly valuable about the sexting course that I designed is I'm trying to meet teenagers where they are. And I'm not in this course just saying to them, sexting is bad, don't do it, because there is a lot of really compelling research on how if you just tell teenagers don't do this thing that's dangerous, I'm sure anyone who's been a teenager, which is all of us, and anyone who has been a parent of a teenager, which is many people, can tell you if you tell a teenager don't do that, it's dangerous, that they some of them kind of turn around and that's exactly what they do, right? Because it's not just dangerous, like they're doing it because they're getting something out of it. So I try to take a really realistic view of just helping them think through what are those risks and are they worth it versus the benefits? Because if you only talk about risks, like you just lose their attention, you lose them because you're not being realistic because, the research is showing of 16 and 17-year-olds, like 30% of them are sexting. And they've been told for 10 years, like, don't do it. And yet 30% of them are doing it. So that just don't do it attitude is it's not going to be realistic. And of course, from a legal perspective, the course is very clear, like this is illegal because it's going to be illegal for anyone who's under 18. And, we're very clear about that in the course. But at the same time, like we know that there's underage drinking. We know that people use drugs like that are illegal, right? Like, and we have to figure out how do we give them a realistic message that is going to resonate with them. But more broadly, I think for both courses, the education about consent and healthy relationships, that's something that I would be happy if every teenager had to take in grade 9 or something. If they had to sort of learn that, maybe earlier too, like age appropriate stuff about, consent and healthy communication, boundaries. I just think that's really, valuable for everyone. And I think like thinking about, rape myths and thinking about gender norms and stereotypes, is just really important for everyone. There's a study that's been like replicated a number of different times that's really disturbing to me, but I think it illustrates why education is just so important for everyone. So what they'll do in this study is they'll ask college age men, so like 18 to 22, they'll ask men basically, would you sexually assault someone if you knew you would not get caught and there would be absolutely no consequences? And they phrase it without using the word rape and without making it sound like maybe it's rape, but the thing that's described is rape. And 30% of them say yes, they would do it. 30%, right? So this is not necessarily a thing where we just have like a couple people who sort of got the wrong idea. This is something that like everyone needs to learn about. They need to learn more about consent. They need to know that like that scenario that they're given in that study, like that is sexual violence, but they're not even seeing it as that because it's sort of, they just sort of describe a scenario and it's about, pressure and it's about sort of coercion, right? But it meets the definition of rape, but the men who are taking this study, like they don't see it that way. And so we have a third of young men basically are walking around saying like, oh yeah, I would rape someone if I knew I wouldn't get caught. And I knew there was no consequences and they don't even see it. Like they would probably still say to you, and in the study they did, would you, is rape wrong? Would you rape someone? No, like they wouldn't do that because they know that like that's wrong. But when you describe to them this scenario in which clearly there is no consent, they're like, yes, I would do that. So all of that to say is like, I think the benefit of these programs for both of them is hopefully it would reach that 1/3 of men and maybe get them to think more and to learn something about, how do we actually have a healthy relationship that is consensual at all times and that isn't, as any kind of sexual violence involves. I think the other thing that's valuable for everyone is that really like technology does complicate our communication and our sexual and romantic relationships. And so both courses are trying to get people to think through how to use technology to talk to people, to talk to your partners in a way that's healthy and productive, and that makes sure you don't do anything that's causing any form of online abuse or whatnot. So I think I try to put in a lot of skills that are really relevant for anyone who takes it. So my hope is that they would come away from this course, having learned really a lot about technology and about sexual relationships.
Perfect. Well, they're both terrific courses, so we're excited to get them out there. Let me jump to the audience and see if there's any questions out there. And looks like we do have one for you. And it says, my state doesn't have a juvenile sexting law, but we have a legislative mandate for our schools to provide education on these topics. Is this course appropriate for school use?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think the sexting course, it really, I was saying before, it applies to anyone, whether they have never sexted in their life, whether they've sent a photo, whether they've received a photo. It's pitched really broadly of just understanding what is sexting, trying to figure out how do we sort of make choices about this? How do we make healthy choices? I could go on about the consent piece, but I think that's just so important for any high school or even junior high student to sort of learn about. So, yeah, I think the sexting course in particular, it would really be relevant for any teenager because I think there's just so much for them to learn about how to use technology in a healthy way, how to use the internet and mobile phones, and make sure you understand the risks and the sort of different dynamics. One thing we talk about is the online disinhibition effect, which just means that when we speak to people online, there's sort of different dynamics of communication that happen because we're not face to face, we're not in person, and so that changes things. And something like that is just one example of how it's just. I think the sexting course is really. I'd be happy if every high school student in the whole country took it, because I got everything I put in there is like they all need it, right? Like. If they haven't sexted, they probably will. And that's the thing about the research on like young adults is once they're 18 to 24 in that bracket, some of the studies are like 50% are sexting. Other studies, if you define sexting broadly enough, it's like 75, 80% of young adults are sexting. So I hope before anyone ever sexts, if they took my course first, I think they would be much better off. I mean, maybe that's, I don't know if that's just like too wild of a claim, but like I would be really happy for every high schooler to take it. I think they would just learn a lot that they clearly need to learn.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they would definitely benefit from it. So, let's see. I don't see any other questions right now. So we'll wrap up. So thank you so much, Dr. Hasinoff. I think it was great. Thanks also to everyone that joined us today. We hope you enjoyed it, and I'm happy to let you know that both the juvenile sexting and the adult revenge porn courses are now available for our customers. Since we provide access to all of our content, titles should be listed in the course dropdown in your version of Advent eLearning. If you don't see the courses listed, please contact customer support and they'll help you out. If you're not an Advent eLearning customer and would like to learn more about these and other courses we offer, you can email your rep if you have one, or email info@Adventfs.com and someone will be in touch. You can go to Adventfs.com/elearning-programs to see a full list of what courses we offer, and we'd be happy to let you review any of them for free. Just let us know which ones you're interested in. We did record this webinar today, so if you came in late, I saw a few people did, we'll be able to send a link out to you so that you can catch the full fascinating webinar that we just had. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Hasinoff, for your time, and everybody have a great day.